Ephraim, welcome to New Books in Jewish Studies.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So Ephraim, please tell us about yourself before we turn and talk about your books on the Torah.
Okay, my name is Ephraim Chamiel, or in short, Effie. I am 77 years old, live in Jerusalem all my life, born in Jerusalem. I'm married, I have 4 boys and 10 grandchildren. I served as a banker with Bank Leumi for 37 years, in between 5 years in LA. And I studied a few years in the Hebrew University. I am now, I have my PhD in Jewish thought, especially in the modern era of the Jewish thought. And if you know Hebrew, you can go into Wikipedia and read about me in Hebrew, unfortunately not in English. Yeah, that's about me at this moment.
Well, as we begin to think about the books, the commentaries you've written on the Torah, would you tell us about the Torah cycle of reading and the role of Torah in Judaism?
Okay, the Torah in Judaism is the basic book of Judaism. It all started with the Torah, or as you call it, the Old Testament. That's when Judaism starts. The tradition of Judaism believed that it was given to Moses during the 40 years in the desert after they were released from Egypt. Some researchers are thinking differently, but in any case, it's very old, few thousand years old, and it's the basic of Judaism. Our sages in the old era, they have divided the Torah into a cycle of reading. That every Shabbat we read one portion out of 52 weeks. So it was divided actually to 50 portions, and we read one portion usually every Shabbat in the synagogue. And it all started from the Torah, and everything else in Judaism is actually based on that, and is how do you say, perush, is an explanation of what's written in it.
Now, there have been many approaches for interpreting the Torah throughout history, whether Peshat or Remez or Drash or Sod. Would you explain to us the approach that you take in these books and why you chose that approach?
Yes, there are many commentaries, very different systems, how to explain the Torah and what's in it, as you said. And I prefer the Pshat, meaning to read the plain meaning of the text before you go into Midrash, and sometimes you go into mystery, Kabbalah, or philosophy. You know, the Rambam says that the Torah is actually a philosophy book. And the way I read it is to try to understand the plain meaning of the text. And my system is a different genre from all other commentators before me. I decided I will go through the text, explain it and tell it in a simple Hebrew or English as I can, and based on about 100 Pshat commentators that I read, and I chose from them the best that I think is actually the plain meaning of the text. And in some cases where I didn't find something that I like, I try to find something myself. But most of it is a collection of other commentators, which I, in my comments, in my notes, I send the reader to the sources, to the commentary sources, so that if you plan something to say on Shabbat, you can go read the sources and come up with something to say to your listeners.
So your commentary forms something of a synthesis of previous interpreters, as you've noted. So along the way, did you discover, maybe give us the top 3 interpreters of Torah that you resonate with the most, that you felt had, the right simple meaning of the text?
Actually, yes. Out of these 100 commentators, I wrote my commentary, Lada Torah, to Know Torah. I wrote it after I finished my PhD. My PhD I did on few thinkers of the 19th century who try to combine philosophy with Judaism. They decided that they want to hold on to modernity and at the same time keep the Jewish belief in the Torah. So these commentators in the 19th century, I like them very much. One of them is Luzzatto, Shmuel David Luzzatto, we call him Shadal. I liked his commentary very much. And the other one was Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, from Germany. Shadal was from Italy and Rashal Hirsch is from Germany. I wrote my PhD on their thought, but during researching them, I went through their commentary and I like very much the way they look at the pshat of the text, at the plain meaning of the text, as a book of ethics, a book that wants to teach us how to be good people, better people. And that's the way they read all the text of the Torah. And I like this approach, and I adopted it in my commentary. And again, some other commentators who wanted to say that the Torah is cruel and very egoistic. I'm showing in my research, in my commentary, that it's not true, and according to Shadal and Rashal Hirsch. Also, on top of these two, I have 3 others that influenced me. One of them is my father, who also wrote something on the Torah. The other 3 are Moshe David Kasuto, who was actually follower of Shadal, and the 2 Leibovich brothers, Nechama and Yeshayahu Leibovich, who each one of them wrote commentary on the Torah, and those people are the commentators that influenced me.
And to get a taste for some of your Torah interpretation, would you talk to us about Parashat Lech Lecha, the calling of Abram, and including its relationship to the previous failures of humanity? It's an enjoyable section in your book.
Yes, I'm not the first one to say that, but if you read it, you read through the stories in the beginning of the Chumash of Genesis, you can see that actually the Torah is telling us that God has made few trials on humanity to see which one can stay on and keep what God wanted to get from us. Okay, so the first trial was in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden. Okay, God was trying to get humanity to be in the Garden of Eden, but it didn't work because all of us, we know that Adam and Eve couldn't hold on to the instruction of God, and there was the great sin. It failed. So then God was throwing them out from Gan Eden, from the Garden of Eden, and they tried to build the humanity outside Gan Eden on the regular conditions of life, and it also didn't work because of lust and thieves and all kind of sins. God has to bring the Mabul. How do you call it in English?
The flood.
The flood. Yeah, God had to bring the flood on earth and diminish almost everything except for Noah, that was chosen to continue humanity and go to the third trial of God with humanity. It looks like it didn't work as well, because humanity, as we know the story of the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babylon, and the people there didn't behave properly, and God had to spread them over around the world because they couldn't keep up with what God was trying to get from them. Good people who are looking for ethics and morality, and since they didn't, he had to spread them all around. So then God decided, okay, if it doesn't work with all humanity, I will have to choose one person and his family, and from them I will try to establish my teaching, and they will teach it to the other nations. So he chose Abraham, or maybe Abraham chose him. We don't really know how exactly it started, but they made a nice joint venture, and God decided to teach Abraham the way of morality. And Abraham was 75 years old when it all started. So this was the last trial of God. And since then, we are on the road. Came Christianity and Islam. They all came from the Old Testament. And the spirit of Abraham is now almost all over the globe. And that's the way the Torah looks at it.
Now, you noted in the introduction to your Genesis volume that while following the plain sense of the text, you do provide occasionally innovative readings of Torah passages. Would you give us an example of one of your fresh readings?
I'm willing to give you three of those readings. First of all, we have a holiday called Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the year. That's the day we celebrate our day of judgment with God. And on that day, we read few portions from Genesis, the story of Abraham and Ishmael, and Abraham and Isaac. And actually, I read that story together with my father and Uri Simon, two commentators, very interesting. They are saying that we don't have here one Akedah of Abraham with Yitzchak, but we have two Akedot. We have one with Abraham and Ishmael, that he had to send Hagar and Ishmael away. This was the first Akedah for Abraham. And then with Yitzchak, he had the second Akedah. So this story started with the story of Ishmael and Hagar and Abraham, and finished with the story of Yitzchak and Abraham, with the Akedah of Yitzchak on the top of Moriah mountain. So the story is one story. In between, there is a small story that Avimelech is calling Abraham and tell him, you have to sign you have to sign something with me, a contract. And he said to him, you did what you did with Ishmael, but you cannot do this to my son or my grandson. So you swear to me, and let's make a contract that you'll be a good neighbor and you are not going to do to me what you did to your son. So Abraham agreed, they signed the contract, but God heard this and he said, oh no, Abraham didn't do this to Ishmael because he is a bad man or because he decided to be immoral. He did that because I told him that Ishmael doesn't fit to the family, to the moral family, not because Abraham is not a good man. And if you think that Abraham loves Isaac more, you will see that if I instruct him to do something to Isaac, he will do it. Because he does what I tell him to do, what I command him to do, he does. So that's why God has decided to do this trial with Abraham. Because of Avimelech was a Gentile who doubted Abraham, then God that says, okay, we'll do something that will show all humanity that Abraham is actually a good man, but he does the good deeds because God is telling him to do that. That's one thing. Another thing is how to understand the God instruction, God's command to Abraham to slaughter his son just like this. I mean, after all the promises you made to him, he gives him instruction to slaughter his son. I mean, how could we, the modern generation, understand that? And in order to understand that, I give 5 ways that a modern reader can explain to himself these instructions of God. How God is commanding something like that with a black flag on it. How can it happen? And I try to explain it, and I call each one of you, you can open the book and read the 5 ways I suggest. One of them is the psychological way of reading, the psychological approach. According to this, God never told Abraham to do that. It was a fight between Abraham himself, in his mind. One voice in him called him to slaughter his son for God, like all idol worshippers were doing at that time. And another voice in him is telling him, don't do that. You are a moral person. You are different. You cannot do it. So all the story is actually a psychological story that happened in Abraham's mind. And eventually he listened to the good voice in himself and he didn't do it. And therefore he was blessed and whatever. This is one explanation out of the 5. The third example I want to give you is the blessing of Isaac. You know, the story with Isaac and Rivka and Jacob and Esau. Okay, when Isaac decided to give a blessing, and he called Esau and tells him, go out, bring me some good food to eat. And Esau is going out, and Rebecca hears what he said, and she said to Jacob, go quickly, bring something from the deer, and I'll make some food to your father, and he will give you the blessing. And here, there are actually a few questions. As we know, how could Rebecca and Jacob cheat Isaac? To get a blessing by cheating doesn't make sense. And also, was Isaac senile? He couldn't see that Esau doesn't fit to continue the spiritual family of Israel. He cannot do it. How come he wanted to bless him? And the third question is, how about Esau? Was he such a righteous person, actually? Or what the story with Esau? actually he was right. He was cheated, and they took the blessing out of him. So in order to read this story, we have to read the whole story as a package. It started when Esau married two Canaanites against the instruction of Abraham. He married two Canaanites who were idol worshipping, and Rebekah and Isaac didn't like it at all. They didn't think immediately that Esau doesn't belong to the moral, spiritual families that they wanted to raise. Secondly, Esau, he didn't care about the firstborn, being the firstborn. He sold it to Jacob. He gave it up. He didn't like it, didn't need it. He said, I don't need that. And you can have it. He sold it. But then when he comes to get the blessing, he said, I am your firstborn, give me the blessing. So actually he was the cheater. And Jacob had to fight him at the same tools. He had to cheat as well. But the most important is that Rebekah made a mistake, because Isaac was not senile at all. He knew exactly who Esau was and who Jacob was. So he planned a plan that didn't work. He planned to give each one of them a blessing. He plans to give Esau the material blessing and to give Jacob the spiritual blessing of Abraham. And this way he thought the two brothers will go together and they will build the family of Israel. But Isaac was wrong. Somebody without moral like Esau cannot be part. So what happened is that Rebekah heard that Isaac calls Esau and tell him to bring something to eat. She assumed that Isaac is senile and he wanted to give the spiritual blessing to Esau. And she said, oh my God, he's senile. Let's go, Emma, quick. We'll get the food and you'll get the spiritual blessing. What happened? That Jacob get the material blessing, because this is what God wanted actually. He got the material blessing. And then when he lived to Haran to meet Rachel, Isaac gives him the blessing of Abraham. So actually he got two blessings. The two blessings he got, and so this is actually the story. It's actually a drama with few acts, and we can see how it develops. At the end, God achieved what he wanted. Okay, these are a few examples of my explanation, basically based on some other commentators, but I bring it all together.
Fascinating. Well, let's look at a final example of your interpretation. Would you tell us what you gleaned and what you teach in for Parashat Ha'azinu, the song that Moses records for Israel in Deuteronomy 32?
Yeah, that's there is nothing special in my explanation there. It's you have to know how to read it, and it's actually a testimony. God tell Moses to teach this song, Zinu, this song, to teach it to the people until they know it by heart. And this will serve as a testimony in the future, when they in the future sin and get into troubles. They will open the book of books, they will open Zinu, and they will remember it by heart, and they will understand that it's their fault for what happened to them, because the people, as the prophet Zinu says, they will not know how to thank God for what he did for them. Okay, and therefore they will sin and they will worship idols, and therefore they will be punished and will be exiled and almost annihilated. But God will not forget them. And actually, what will happen is that Israel's enemy, they will think that they didn't understand that they are messengers of God. They will think that they achieved everything because of their power. They will be proud of their power, and it's going to be a big mistake, because eventually God will come back, the people will come back to God, and the enemies will be defeated, and there will be a victory over idol worshippers and all those murderers who killed the people, not knowing that they are messengers of God to kill the sinners, to punish the sinners. That's the story of Azinu.
Before we let you go, Effie, could you tell us about any other projects you may be working on?
Actually, the commentary on the Torah that I wrote was actually a side work of mine, and I didn't write it as a Bible researcher. I wrote it as a layman who read the books and commentaries and want to put them all together in a simple language so people will be able to read it and understand what's written in it. My actual academic work, as I said before, was dedicated to the 19th century, 20th century Judaism and the modern era. And on that, I wrote several books. The first book was my PhD, and it's called The Middle Way. It's on Shadal, on Rashar Hirsch, and Maharatz Hayes, three thinkers of the 19th century, and the ways that they combined, as I said, as they combined modernity with tradition, the Jewish tradition. And then I went on to the 20th century and even our era, and I wrote a few more books. The second book is called The Dual Truth. And this is something that I find out in Shadal's writing, Luzzatto, that he wrote, you have to find it, about the dual truth, that actually the way to solve the contradiction between philosophy and religion, between the philosophy and tradition, is to believe in dual truth, to get to keep the approach of dual truth, meaning that we don't have one truth as we thought in the modern era, but there are at least two truths that we have to hold, although nevertheless they contradict one another from time to time. We have to understand that we have to live with this contradiction and hold on to these two truths. And this is the only way to keep modernity and religion at the same time. Otherwise, all other systems are not holding on, according to my opinion. And the third book and the fourth book are actually on the same issue between religion and reason. Part 1 and part 2, I dedicated the first one to thinkers who hold the approach of the dual truth, and the second part to modern thinkers who couldn't believe that contradiction is acceptable, and they wanted to try and solve this contradiction, and I think that they couldn't do it. It's a dead end. You cannot solve this problem without having the approach of the dual truth. My last book is called I don't even remember how it is called in English. It is called The Essence of Scholarship and Its Development. It's a collection of articles that I wrote during Corona on Judaism, all kind of commentaries on portions in Mishnah and the Talmud, and also in the Chumash, and it's a collection of papers that I wrote during the two Coronas, So it will be two parts of this book. This is actually my work, and it's all written in Wikipedia. You can read it if you know Hebrew.
Well,
Also, I have a website. I have a website which is also in English, and you can also go into my website, my personal website, and find out everything.
Good. And we'll
You want to know? You know what? You want to know where you can purchase the books?
Yes.
Okay, I'll tell you. The books to Know Torah you can find in Amazon. Amazon, not expensive. And also my other books, my PhD and the other books that I mentioned were all translated to English. And they are all in Amazon, and also in Hebrew. You can get them at the Carmel Publishing House in Jerusalem, in their website. Thank you very much for listening.
We'll put a link on our website so they can find your books. Well, Effie, it's been a delight to hear from you and about your work on the Torah. We thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, friends, you've been listening to New Books in Jewish Studies, a channel of the New Books Network. Until next time, goodbye.